Thank you to Francesca for inviting me. It's a great honor to share some of my work with you all. So today I'm going to be talking about solidarity with people on the move in Ireland. I'm going to be comparing formal and informal approaches. And this comes from my PhD research at the University of Limerick with the wonderful Ronnie Greenwood, who's here, as funded by the Irish Research Council, and then also some independent work that I've done with the Irish Refugee Council, funded by Share QSN. So I'll just launch in. Hopefully I won't go over my 20 minutes, but if I do go over, Dora or Maria or anyone, please interrupt me and tell me to hurry up. So today, as I said, I'm going to present research from two projects related to solidarity with people on the move in Ireland. So firstly, my PhD research, which involved 3 multi-method studies on the experiences and outcomes of community solidarity initiatives with people on the move and the wider Irish community. And then secondly, I'll be drawing on the results of an evaluation that I did of community sponsorship in Ireland, that was done in collaboration with the Irish Refugee Council. And the aim of today is really to compare the features, experiences and outcomes of both types of solidarity initiatives. And I'm going to attempt to use an ecological framework to do this, just as a mode of comparison. So by sharing this work, I hope that we can have a discussion together about how we can apply community psychology to research and action that builds solidarity among people on the move and the wider community, and to resist dehumanizing stereotypes and dehumanizing treatment of people on the move. So just to give you a little bit of context. So Ireland has traditionally been a country of emigrants, and the number of people leaving Ireland had traditionally surpassed the number of people moving to Ireland up until about 20 years ago, during the economic boom. And this has reversed during recession, and then recently started to increase the number of people coming to the country, with the numbers you can see here from April 2022 with positive net migration, but this doesn't include the 50,000 Ukrainian refugees that Ireland has welcomed since April. Ireland has shown a warm welcome to Ukrainian refugees, and as in other European countries, there's been a huge public outpouring of support for people fleeing the war. The temporary protection directive that was given to Ukrainian refugees gives them access to benefits and entitlement in a similar way to Irish people. But this is in stark contrast to people seeking sanctuary from other countries, who experience long delays and barriers to accessing basic services and benefits. I'm going to discuss that a little bit more later. But members of the wider Irish community have pledged to host 4,000 Ukrainian refugees through the Irish Red Cross pledge scheme. And then there's been a significant amount through private arrangements as well. That's about 38,000 or so people are staying in state provided accommodation, such as hotels and B&Bs. The ongoing housing crisis has led to a lack of capacity, and so tents were used to house people on the move from Ukraine and other countries during the summer. But as winter approached, only people from other countries remained in the tents, and Ukrainian refugees were found accommodation elsewhere. So these are just some examples. There are many, many more of the differential treatment that people on the move experience based on their country of origin, and it reflects the ingrained racism that exists within Europe as a whole and our Irish society. Just as an example, non-white people and members of the Indigenous traveller community in Ireland face discrimination at all levels of society. And a recent report found that people from Black backgrounds were the most discriminated against, with 30% of discrimination coming from public officials. Reception of people on the move in Ireland is shaped by the labels of asylum seeker, economic migrant, or refugee, which reproduce hierarchies of deservingness that predict who is treated as human or worthy of support. A stark example of this is the system of direct provision, which I shortened to DP. This is a system for people seeking asylum in Ireland. It was established as a temporary measure in 2000 for people to be accommodated while their applications for asylum were being processed. People receive room and board and a small weekly stipend, which is $38.80 per week. This system uses hotels and B&Bs, and it's run for profit. People living in the system experience cramped conditions, a lack of privacy, disempowering and cruel regulations, and long stays, which has a devastating effect on mental health and well-being. There have been hundreds of reports from all sections of society calling out this cruelty and calling for the abolition of the system. And the government has pledged to dismantle it by 2024, but there hasn't been any work to do this so far. They're citing the situation with Ukrainian refugees as a reason for this. But as you can imagine, people living in direct provision were disproportionately affected by COVID as well, because they weren't able to physically distance or isolate in any way. And Ronit Lenton uses this as an example to argue that people seeking asylum in Ireland are not treated as humans, and direct provision is a site of racialized violence. Community solidarity initiatives that I focus my research on are informal groups that have been established by members of the wider community and people living in direct provision. And these groups really were set up to bridge the divide between them. Because direct provision segregates and excludes people in direct provision from the wider society, there was a lack of awareness and there was invisibility of the issues surrounding direct provision. So community solidarity initiatives sought to bring people together to raise awareness and to build bonds of solidarity across groups. So they do this around shared activities such as running or cooking and so on. These groups have a variety of structures, but they share broadly the same aim, which is to bring people together and create bonds of support and friendship. So I'm going to talk a little bit about another solidarity initiative, which was established by the Irish government. So this is the kind of formal approach to solidarity. And this is community sponsorship, which is based on the long-running scheme that you might be aware of in Canada. This scheme involves group community volunteers working in tandem with refugee NGOs and the Irish government to provide housing and support for resettled refugees, which has been mainly from Syria in the context of Ireland. It was established in 2018. And in the scheme, community sponsorship groups raise money from the wider community to pay rent for a refugee family for 2 years, and to provide them with all the resources and connections that they need to establish their lives in Ireland. This model is in its early stages in Ireland, and it was somewhat disrupted by COVID, but it's also gone through several kind of adaptations in response to the situation in Afghanistan and the increased protection needs of people from there. And now it's being adapted to kind of inform support for Ukrainian refugees. So it's gone through a lot of change in its short time. But 32 families have been accommodated through this scheme so far in Ireland. So as you can see, different categories of people on the move have received different types of reception in Ireland. So I'll just speak a little bit about my PhD research, just to give you background on what I did. So the experiences and outcomes of community solidarity initiatives for people on the move and the wider community. And in this study, I examined community solidarity initiatives to understand how they were experienced and to establish whether and how they achieved their aims for both groups. We conducted 3 multi-method studies using an adapted version of photo voice, qualitative interviews, and a quantitative survey. And in the qualitative aspect of the research, we talked to participants of solidarity initiatives who were either people living in direct provision or members of the wider community. And then the quantitative survey also looked at people from both groups who hadn't taken part in these initiatives. I'd just like to acknowledge the amazing support of Ronnie Greenwood in this study from the beginning, and also amazing support from Abby Ritnaika's photographer, and the research assistants Ayman, Ola, David, and Dile, who supported the research. And just to kind of give a bit of background on the study on community sponsorship. So I did this year with the Irish Refugee Council and Share QSN, which is an organisation that's set up to support community sponsorship and the development of community sponsorship in Europe. And the aim of the evaluation was to understand how this programme is running on the ground at the moment, and to capture experiences of all different stakeholders of the programme to identify the benefits and challenges of the programme. So we conducted interviews and focus groups with 27 volunteers, sponsored people, NGO staff, and members of the wider community. And I worked with Zuhur Al-Fakir and Angam Yunus to conduct the interviews with the sponsored people. So they were peer researchers on this programme and contributed massively to the work. So I'm bringing in a lot of different research today, but I hope you'll bear with me as I attempt to compare the two types of initiatives using an ecological framework, which has been developed by Francesca Esposito and colleagues, using the Kelly's 4 ecological principles with the additional principle of justice. And this was adapted in their work to, and people here, that of course, to examine experiences of people living in detention. So I hope you'll bear with me as I kind of interpret your work in light of my work, and I hope this research can be of interest to you. So as you well know, just the component of justice refers to social justice or distributive justice and procedural justice. So that's, as Protensky describes, allocation of burdens, rights and responsibilities, or fair, transparent information sharing and participatory decision-making processes. Interdependence looks at the ripple effect of how changes in one setting reverberate across the system and affect other settings, and how individuals and groups vary in how they respond to these changes. Cycling of resources, how resources are defined, created, distributed, and transformed in the setting. Adaptation, how settings affect individuals and groups, and how the groups in turn affect the settings. And succession, which refers to the component of temporality and how time affects changes in these other settings. So I'm just going to work through these different aspects in relation to the two strands of research. And please, if anything isn't clear, please feel free to interject. It'd be nice to have a bit of a discussion, but there will be time for discussion later on, as well, as Dora is going to lead that. So looking at the component of justice in relation to community solidarity initiatives, just speaking from the research that I did, community solidarity initiatives don't affect justice for people in direct provision. Because, you know, as has been covered elsewhere by many other researchers, and has been detailed in many reports, direct provision, there's a lack of respect for human rights and dignity for people in direct provision. They're blocked from accessing essential resources, and they experience massive delays in the application process. Community solidarity initiatives don't impact that directly. However, in our research, we saw that these initiatives do potentially have an impact on members of the wider community's awareness of the issues involved, and through engagement in solidarity initiatives, they've increased awareness and increased participation and in collective action in support of displaced people's rights, and calling for an end to the direct provision system. We found in our qualitative work that there were dilemmas that this posed for members of the host community that were key stakeholders in community solidarity initiatives. So we found that some participants described the dilemma of being a member of the host group and kind of aligning with the staff or the people in the other members of the host group who are working in direct provision centres in order to kind of put forward their community solidarity initiatives, and how that caused some issues with when they were trying to engage with the residents of these centres. So they were kind of using their powerful status in order to put forward the community solidarity initiative, working within a system that they kind of disagreed with, but kind of using their power in some contexts to put forward their initiative. So in this way, they navigated the power and privilege of their group in the activities of the solidarity initiative. And we also, so as I said, participation in solidarity initiatives related to stronger collective action intentions for participants. So we could see that across both groups. So there's possibly an indirect effect on justice, but it doesn't affect the lived reality of direct provision. So looking at community sponsorship, we can see there's a very different picture for people who are sponsored and living in the community through community sponsorship. They have a home, they have access to a support network within the community, which is much more equitable than the situation that people experience in direct provision. However, they still experience a lack of access to procedural justice through the program. So in the evaluation, we found that in the pre-arrival phase, so when people were still in Lebanon, there was a lack of meaningful engagement or consultation with the families who were putting themselves forward for community sponsorship, and a lack of informed consent to take part in the initiative. So the program was kind of half explained to people, but some NGOs described not wanting to overburden refugees with too much information. So people didn't really know what they were signing up to, or they gave kind of general consent, but not specific consent. And then on the other side, there was a lack of information for the volunteers as well on the families. So the volunteers weren't very equipped to prepare well for the families coming. Also, the selection processes of the UNHCR for community sponsorship were not transparent. None of the stakeholders involved in the program really knew what the selection criteria were, if there were any, and it was a very ad hoc, individualized process of who would be a good fit for community sponsorship. So this creates a problematic situation. And in the post-arrival phase, people experience a lot of anguish and stress over restrictive family reunification rules. So people coming here through community sponsorship had the great support of the community around them, but what they really wanted was their family, and they were blocked from being reunified with their family through restrictive rules. Also, after 2 years, housing supports were removed, or supposed to be kind of phased out from families, so they're kind of left in the precarious housing market. So there were some kind of issues with respect to justice there. So looking at interdependence in relation to community solidarity initiatives, in our first study, we found the interdependence of the context of direct provision, public settings, and community solidarity initiatives. People living in direct provision described the anxiety, indeterminate waiting, boredom, and the liminality of direct provision, and how they were stereotyped and experienced racism as someone from direct provision in public settings. So even when they tried to get out of the direct provision centre, they were still treated as less than human by people around them. And community solidarity initiatives, they described, created some opportunities to be recognised in a way that was closer to how they wanted to be recognised. So affirming valued shared identities in the solidarity initiatives through the activities involved. So in our second study, we also found that we also kind of documented the power dynamics to the contact in solidarity initiatives between members of the wider community and people who are coming from direct provision, and how people kind of negotiated their maybe more privileged or more stigmatized identities and the social representations in relation to one another. So this kind of showed how that stereotyping carries through into solidarity initiatives and mark the kind of contact within them. And in our third study, we found that participation in solidarity initiatives leads to stronger collective action intentions for all, but how cross-group friendships drove this for the host group only. So for members of the host group, making friends with people in direct provision was important to them, and taking collective action in support of displaced people's rights. So this is an interesting finding that kind of showed the interdependence involved in these initiatives. I have a couple of quotes which I can talk about later, but I think just because of time, I'm not going to go through them for now. So looking at interdependence in a community sponsorship context, in the evaluation, we found that community sponsorship had a transformative effect on the local communities that it happened in. Members of the wider community and volunteers discussed an increased capacity for supporting incoming refugees from different countries, and a transformed attitude towards incomers. Whereas in a rural community, people might have been a little bit hesitant or downright prejudiced towards refugees coming to live in their area. The community sponsorship program kind of assuaged some of their concerns, and they were talking about being more open towards refugees, but also the increased capacity. So there's multiple examples, but just as one example, one of the community sponsorship groups involved has maintained their existence even after the end of the program has been marked. They want to continue supporting Ukrainian refugees, so they're kind of using their skills and knowledge to continue their work. Also, in the same context, some of the people who were sponsored initially by community sponsorship groups now are offering their support to other refugees who are coming into their area. So kind of paying it forward and increasing capacity locally. Also, there are numerous examples of how people sponsored through community sponsorship were contributing their skills and their expertise to the local community. So one example was a Syrian man who was teaching members of the local community garden how to conserve water and grow certain plants that he had experience of back in Syria, and improving the community garden as a result. So there's many examples of people kind of sharing their skills and improving their areas through the program. So looking at cycling of resources in the community solidarity initiative, again, like community solidarity initiatives don't affect the the resource management or definition of resources in direct provision, and in this context, resources are managed in a very restrictive way. People living in these settings are forced into the role of recipient, and they're not allowed to contribute in any way by even cooking for themselves, cleaning, maintaining the space. And this is exacerbated by charity that these centres receive from well-meaning people in the local area. So this community solidarity initiatives don't really affect that aspect. However, they can kind of shift or subvert this a little, where especially when people on the move or displaced people are in the lead in these initiatives, they can really model how things can be different. So, for example, in a food festival, where residents of direct provision were invited to take part, they cooked all their own food and served it to the local community, putting themselves in the role of giver and members of the local community as recipients, and kind of subverted that a little bit. So looking at cycling of resources for community sponsorship, this in terms of kind of money, time, knowledge and opportunities, the Government of Ireland funds regional support organisations who offer guidance to community solidarity, community sponsorship groups, and then these groups support the family through funds raised in the community. However, there's no oversight of how these funds are managed by community sponsorship groups. It's really up to the groups themselves how they do this, and this leads to different kind of levels of transparency and different different levels of participation of the sponsored people as well. So this can cause some issues. Also, there's an initial burden on the volunteers to provide resources for the families when they're being set up initially, but this does shift over time, and the sponsored families talked about offering their support to the local people and to the volunteers. So that power dynamic does shift over time, to a certain extent at least. But one really big issue is communication barriers. So language skills of both the sponsored people and the volunteers. And where there are communication barriers, it really impedes empowering practices around resource management, where you find volunteers really just making decisions for the sponsored people and kind of not being as participatory as they could be. So moving to adaptation and community solidarity initiatives. In direct provision, people are coping with the liminality of being in this institutionalized setting, of having a stigmatized identity, experiencing discrimination, and community solidarity initiatives cannot impact that setting. However, as I mentioned before, through the solidarity initiatives, there can be a space for positive expression of positive identities and collective recognition, which can support to a certain extent coping with in that setting. Also, we've found that members of the wider host community who take part in these initiatives have increased their openness towards other cultures and learning about other cultures and people in direct provision. So they're adapting and kind of becoming more open through the process. My research didn't take in the effects of COVID. I finished my data collection just as COVID was happening. But my colleagues here, Dora and Moshood and others here, we were working on an article which was talking about the COVID syndemic and how the COVID pandemic really impacted people on the move disproportionately, and that was really borne out in direct provision as well. As I mentioned before, people couldn't observe physical distancing in these spaces. They weren't afforded enough space, and they also were stigmatized in the public sphere as kind of carriers of disease. In one example, people in direct provision were kind of locked down to their specific building. In Ireland, we didn't have lockdowns as strictly as in Europe, but in this direct provision centre, people were locked down to their specific building because of an outbreak of COVID in there, and locals kind of were stigmatizing residents very strongly as a result. So in this way, you can see how adaptation in the setting was borne out during COVID. So looking at adaptation in community sponsorship, we can see that people who come through community sponsorship are supported to cope and adapt to life in Ireland with the support of the volunteers. Volunteers support them with learning language and linking to local services. However, COVID really impacted this, especially for people who had just arrived to Ireland and were really in need of a lot of support. They were completely cut off from the local support. So this was a huge barrier. But across the evaluation, we can see that like sponsored people showed great strengths and capacities and motivation to adapt and thrive despite the myriad adversities that they experienced. Adaptation of the model. So since community sponsorship was established in 2018, the model has been adapted multiple times in response to everything that's been going on. So in respect to COVID, community sponsorship groups adapted to online methods of fundraising and working. Just as one example, in respect to Afghanistan, the community sponsorship program had been stalled because of a lack of travel and all the travel restrictions that were happening. And so community sponsorship groups pivoted to supporting refugees coming from Afghanistan and adapted the model as a result. And then now we're seeing community sponsorship be adapted to kind of inform the kind of wide scale hosting that's happening in Ireland. Have I got more time? Have I gone over time yet, or?
It's a good idea to start wrapping up, maybe.
Okay, thank you, Dora, for your very well carefully chosen words. Thank you.
I was enjoying it.
Yeah, it's like wrap up. Okay, so I'm just going to skip these slides and I'll just skip to the discussion. So we can see that fundamentally the conditions of justice are unequal between community sponsorship and community solidarity initiatives because of the categorization of people as asylum seekers or refugees. But the common features of both groups are the strengths of people on the move to challenge the circumstances they experience and to push for positive changes. And among the host community, both initiatives increase awareness of people on the move, of the issues that people on the move face, and they increase openness and capacity to welcome further people in the future. Cross-group friendships are key to both initiatives. Solidarity initiatives demonstrate what's possible when people on the move and members of the wider community collaborate in a non-hierarchical way, and how celebration, identity recognition, and resistance to oppression can be an aspect of this. Community sponsorship demonstrates how communities can work together with NGOs and the government to support people on the move to make their home in Ireland, to thrive and to contribute to society. So both community efforts to welcome and show solidarity are well-meaning and are very valuable, but volunteers of all these kinds of initiatives need support to ensure that their work doesn't reproduce the hierarchies of deservingness and the racialized categorizations that characterize people on the move's experiences in receiving countries, and that more of these initiatives need to be led by people on the move themselves. There needs to be space for this to happen more. Yeah, I think I'm going to just wrap up now because I think I've gone massively over time. I didn't really notice. So here are my references. And if anyone has any comments or questions, please feel free to contact me. And I'll hand over to Dora now. Thank you so much, and apologies for going so over time.
Okay, Megan, just before a little word before we move on to Dora. Thank you for your presentation. I think your contribution is very interesting and useful for the enhancement and understanding of qualitative methods to study things that we sense but need to be systematized in order to become an instrument for social policy. So thank you for that. And so I would pass on to Dora for her comments, and then we go back to our conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Megan.
Well, thank you so much, Megan. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was really delighted hearing you and learning more about the Solidarity Initiative in Ireland. Thank you for this brilliant presentation, and thank you to you and Francesca for inviting me to be here today. So what I'll try to do is to take some of the cues that I understood from your presentation and from your work and connect these with the observations I made in my own field research on solidarity with people on the move in other places, namely in Portugal and other areas across Europe. And I will take advantage of this work also to reflect back on how we have been evolving on this aspect of solidarity and what is there left for us now to do, and what is the significance of these initiatives in the times that we are living. So as illustrated in your wonderful presentation, solidarity with people on the move can take up completely different forms, depending on the position of the actors involved and also on how the agency of people on the move is considered and is put into the picture. So the participation of a variety of social actors in providing support to people on the move is not necessarily a new phenomena. It has been there, and we have been hearing since mid-80s about different forms of volunteerism and activism denouncing Fortress Europe and the human consequences of borders, of harsh borders, and offering assistance to people who are attempting to reach European territories. However, we have to admit that the 2000s, and particularly after 2015, there seemed to have been a quantitative shift in these initiatives, particularly in what comes to the scope and the visibility of these initiatives, and also the involvement of civil society. So first, I think we need to understand, what do these solidarities mean in the wider political sense? And which are the actors that chose to be involved in providing assistance and support to people on the move? And what has been the impact of these actions in an increasingly harsher border regime, which has been immobilizing and stranding people all over Europe and in its peripheries? And also, what are we doing in these spaces? Particularly, what are psychologists doing in these spaces? Are we helping? Or in some instances, can we be critics of ourselves and see that sometimes we might be merely utilitarian actors performing what the European border regime has decided to be the fate of people on the move? So let's reflect a little bit about that. This is a small provocation for us to think about. So these recent years have highlighted some problems in the nature of solidarity initiatives. For example, it has highlighted how selective they can be in showing empathy, how they can reproduce what Megan has illustrated as hierarchies of deservingness, separating and dividing people according to nationality. We saw how the empathy for Syrian people had its peak in early 2015 when thousands of people ran to Greece to support Syrian people to cross borders and reach safety. I remember working in the UK at that time that there were organizations of solidarity which were specifically created for Syrian refugees, and they would refuse to support others. And look at where we are now. We now are in a situation where the international community has forgotten the Syrian crisis. And we are in a situation where even humanitarian agencies like UNHCR warn Syrian refugees not to travel. They warn them officially to stay in place. So, but let me start by highlighting this outstanding growth in the informal solidarity initiatives. So when in 2015, thousands of private citizens traveled to Greece and Italy to assist people on the move through their transnational journeys, many researchers, such as myself, have witnessed and documented how people created so many diverse forms of more or less intensive, short or longer term support to newly arrived individuals and families. Sometimes working in unstable contexts, enduring the harshening of migration laws, and trying to counter the immobilization of people, and sometimes even facing the criminalization of their own gestures of solidarity. Examples like Cédric Héroux and Pierre-Alain Manouni or Martine Landry in France, who were prosecuted for helping people to cross the border from Italy to France, or Sara Mardini, a Syrian refugee resettled in Germany, and Sean Binder, an Irish solidarian who was arrested in Greece for supporting refugees in the island of Lesbos. Or even the countless cases of search and rescue crews whose boats were arrested and solidarians faced criminal charges of people smuggling for years. So solidarity responses have been shaped by local and national contexts, and people have adapted to various forms of performing solidarity according to their motivations, their availabilities, their political positioning, and their alliances. And a lot of people have formed new collectives to be able to pursue their vision of solidarity and to grow and expand their capacity to support people on the move. And in some cases, the kind of support that was offered remained mostly humanitarian, whereas in others, people have become more politicized. And a range of factors seem to have an impact on the kind of involvement that different people have decided to take. The classic argument in favor of the humanitarian approaches state that the moral legitimacy of humanitarian action derives from the separation of immediate care and protection from politics. So it is taken as a positive stance. But critical approaches to charity and humanitarian aid, they say that actually the excessive focus on the suffering subjects and on compassion contributes to divert the attention from public responsibilities and from politics. And politics are inevitable when we talk about refugees. So the fact that in the vast majority of formal solidarity projects, providing support to people on the move reject an engagement with this inevitable political side of people on the move situation marks an important distinction from the informal ones. And so we have to wonder, looking at these initiatives of informal solidarity, is another protection regime possible? Or is it time for a more radical abolitionist position? So scholars of volunteerism emphasize a demarcation between volunteering and activism. One way in which this distinction has been conceptualized is by defining volunteering as targeting people and activism as targeting structures. So one could argue that the activist aims to change while the volunteer aims to maintain. In the present moment, however, it seems that this insistence in strictly delineating between volunteering and activism, or between material aid, humanitarian aid, and politics might be limited to understanding the social realities of people on the move, such as Megan so well explained. So the eruption of new actors in the sphere of solidarity with people on the move often work in a gray area between formality and informality, and they raise new questions. So observing the work performed by the informal initiatives that Megan explained to us, and by others in Europe, like the Plateforme Citoyenne in Belgium, one can see the transformative power of humanitarian aid as a sort of a subversive humanitarianism, which can be defined as a form of moral responsibility that acquires a political character because it is in opposition of an excessively securitization policies that is taken by the state. So this transformation does not happen without conflict. It's also Megan so well illustrated in the dilemmas that the people who she worked with had. So it involves a strong dilemma of power and privilege to start with between the Solidarians and people on the move that they are supporting. It also portrays some dilemmas in terms of whether to prioritize personal or structural needs, and whether and how to preserve the grassroots character of the solidarity groups or to move towards professionalization. And such questions are part of a broader set of reflections that structure and characterize volunteers' engagement in protection in various sites in Europe. So an important question is how solidarity itself can change when it humanitarianizes us. In many contexts, previous forms of engagement were keen on distinguishing themselves from humanitarian structures because of their top-down perception. And in that sense, the issues of horizontality, equality, and non-charity have been central themes to migration-related solidarity in a broad sense. Now, regarding this changing nature of solidarity, an anthropologist called Katerina Rosakou from Greece has stated, "The gift taboo has collapsed," and she means that where giving and material aid used to be seen with suspicion by activists, working with extremely marginalized people, such as people on the move in the last years, have brought a significant change. And we realize that in situations of extreme hardship, the idea of giving and forms of material generosity have gained a more central place in the practices of solidarity, and have also been enacted by actors who traditionally were a little bit more hostile towards this kind of support. So in that sense, the involvement of large numbers of people collectively has implications for both parties. On the one hand, the boundaries of humanitarian work have been challenged by the latest involvement of civil society in more informal ways. And on the other hand, solidarity itself has evolved in its structure. The ambiguities and contradictions faced by people offering solidarity has led to more opportunities for us to debate. And from what I can understand, it also has led us to more self-awareness and more rich dialogue for people who are doing this, the actors that are engaging in solidarity. And a conversation around privileged and positionality is there, which is really good. And it's something for us to cherish and to continue. And particularly this issue of replacing the state on providing services in its stead, I think it has been crucial and it has to be further debated. We have been torn between the moral imperatives to assist those in need and their disapproval and our disapproval at the same time from the partial withdrawal of the state towards these groups of people that we are assisting. So one might ask, what does it mean when civil society and unpaid volunteers and other people, lay people, are filling in the gap left by a resigning state? one might wonder, what are the causes, what are the consequences of this devolution of responsibilities away from the state and into non-professional actors? What are we to do with this responsibility? And this is something for us to reflect, I think. How are we to reimagine our political membership from here? Can we move towards experimenting alternatives of communal existence? And what can be the role of community psychologists in this movement, in this imagination? Can we become more political, is my question. So I think that this also must be assessed in the context of neoliberalization of our states, of our nation states, which is characterized by a privatization of some of the old functions in terms of social welfare, as well as in relation to an increase in authoritarian states in many European countries, such as Italy, unfortunately. So while we have been discussing the situation of people on the move until now in this panel, these realities are actually experienced by many other marginalized people that other people here are working with. And I can give some examples, such as Roma people, homeless people, minoritized groups. They have been also the target of this selective and intentional withdrawal of services from the state. And so the question of responding appropriately to such developments has to be a structuring component of solidarity, and where are we going to move from now on solidarity initiatives. And finally, another important effect of this withdrawal from the state concerns the way in which it affects the definitions of solidarity themselves. And here I'm talking about funding. Okay, so when solidarians experience a process of institutionalization as an attempt to make their activities sustainable, they find themselves relying on funding, often coming from problematic funding sources. And the way in which their activities and values are defined in order to access funding and to appeal to the agencies that provide monetary support often leads to conflicts of interest. And often the priority becomes appealing to the agenda of these agencies rather than the needs and the priorities of people on the move. So the definition of things like beneficiaries and target groups automatically, I think, creates categories and distinctions that divide people. The hierarchies of deservingness are also here. And so it feels like it becomes necessary to identify criteria to determine who is worthy of protection and care. And this has been done in line with the norms and models of those agencies and not of people on the move. So I will read to you now an extract from a piece that I co-wrote with refugees and migrants here in Portugal this year. It's still unpublished work, but I think that this is a revealing quote. They say, "Gratitude became a kind of barter that refugees must always carry along. Most of us were often put in a position where, in order to access our basic rights, we actually need to be asking for favors." So I don't want to bother you much more with this reflection. I guess the last thing I wanted to discuss here is on where do we want to move from now, and how these informal solidarity initiatives can allow for the articulation and formulation of new discourses regarding our moral responsibility, the kind of civic values and political community that we want to be, and where states have failed to live up to certain standards of hospitality and dignity. Can we, community psychologists, lay people, people on the move, our allies, can we actually step in by upholding certain standards that are related to the meaning of our collective existence in a different way, in a different imagination, in a different alternative? In doing so, can we propose a different political membership? Can we try and come up with initiatives of mutual support that show that another regime is possible, another way is possible? And what can, just the last reflection, what can a solidarity politics for our future look like? And I just put here some things that we have been reflecting also on our group of migrant justice, and just, you know, to give a cue for the discussion and the dialogue that we will hold after this. Some important points that I think are important and that we can work on, we can do this. One of them is offering counter narratives to the official discourses that do not represent the reality of people on the move, starting by rejecting some of the imposed categories, such as migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. Recently, one researcher that I particularly like, called Polly Pallikus-Wilkins, in her latest book, Humanitarian Borders, she proposed the term life seekers as an opposition to asylum seekers, refugees, migrants. Life seekers because people are escaping social death. They are trying to find a way to live, a way that is fully, life seekers seem to me like a much more accountable way to describe people who are trying to seek sanctuary. And countering as well some of the narratives of protection that are actually referring to punitive measures. For example, detention or immobilization of people in the name of protection has to be countered, because it also establishes hierarchies of deservingness among people. And case in point, the latest policies of protection that were designed exclusively for Ukrainian migrants, allowing for avenues of regularization and accommodation that were specifically designed for Ukrainian migrants and remained sealed for others, is a good example of you know, how harmful this can be and how unfair this can be. Then I think we can also be better at diagnosing the systems rather than the people, and exposing the policies and power mechanisms which are directly and indirectly harming people and are overall embedded in a more border imperialistic project. So to make this explicit, I think it's important for researchers. And then rejecting abusive utilizations of words like vulnerability and trauma when these are disconnected from the realities of people affected by border violences. And actually, we have to admit that trauma assessments have become a sort of key technology for reproducing hierarchies of deservingness and defining the selective access to protection for those who accept to become victims to be saved. So we have to be careful with the utilization of these terms. And then rejecting the representation of people on the move as threats in our nation states, rejecting nationalistic approaches to solidarity, and instead offering more transnational collaborations and offering support for people through different countries. And acting as allies, acting as accomplices, acting as partners to people on the move by resisting colonial tendencies of white saviorism and challenging border violence as a global solidarity project that can serve everyone in the planet. Repairing divisions by creating more unconventional human bonds, by taking inspiration from radical solidarity initiatives, self-organized social spaces, intersectional struggles for sustainable living. People on the move, through their resistance, by the fact that they still come and they still overcome border violence to seek for a life, to seek for a dignifying life, they are showing us, actually, they are leading us on this much needed, more global resistance. I think that this is the pathway to confront multiple other injustices like climate change, like sexism, like racism, and the rise of authoritarian regimes. The communal bonds that we can create beyond the ones that are imposed by nation states. And for those of us who have the privilege of a secure migration status, within the privileges that we have, creating access, creating platforms where the voices of people on the move can be amplified, where people can get access to resources, and where people can be the ones representing themselves and defining their own agendas. I think this is also something that we can try to do. And just to finish, I think it's also important for us to understand that mobility and free movement cannot be the answer to all the problems, but rather we need to think about the call from many communities that say we have the right to stay, we have the right to stay in place. And so it's important when we advocate for equality and justice across divisions of race, gender, nationality, that we also understand that people are allowed to choose where they want to stay and not to be constrained by these ideas of hypermobility, cosmopolitanism, and neoliberal capitalism, but rather people are allowed to choose different ways of living and different alternatives for themselves, which might be different from the ones that we conceive. So it's important for them to be the ones to lead us and to decide. So yeah, just a few reflections and food for thoughts. And I now, I guess, open the stage for a dialogue, a discussion about these ideas and how they can, you know, take us from here to different engagements in these initiatives of solidarity and different contributions in these initiatives of solidarity. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Do we have time for some questions and comments to both our speaker today, Megan, and our commentator? I believe that Erica must have something. Hi, Francesca,
Hi.
you're there.
Hi, everyone. No, it's a very interesting topic, which has many things in common with what I'm study and investigate. I completely agree with Dora about our positionality in doing advocation. And think about my position like researcher, my field work. Yeah, sometimes I feel that I just feel the gap. I just fix something very little, but the problem is very systemic and huge, and I feel that I perpetuate some kinds of dynamics of the system, and then I realized that if solidarity works, or there is a lot of solidarity, this means that the system of asylum protection doesn't work. So maybe it's very frustrating, and I don't know, I have to think about this more, but I really agree with you, Dora. And about the presentation of Megan, very interesting, and I don't have question because no, I don't have question. Just I see something in common with my study, like the initiative of solidarity, the importance of the identity of the people, and the possibility to the people to be themselves. And because people on the move asking for asylum, they have to renegotiate and using this victim position to have access to rights and entitlement. So it's very interesting, this kind of space created by civil society, where people can express themselves, just be there, don't perform any kind of victimism. And I think this is interesting. It is a very, very positive point. But also agree with Dora that developing a more critical discussion and perspective. So there are very positive points in the solidarity initiative from civil societies, but there are also aspects which Dora talk about, and the fact of the voluntary and don't for example try to insert people who have experience of displacement, look at the people as expertise, and I can say, like, not base this initiative on voluntary, but try to create a profession based on the experience of the people, if the people want, of course, and value the experience of the people, of the women went through different experience of gender violence, displacement. So recognize that this can be a profession for the people. And for example, is always informal, and there isn't a really representativeness from people of the move, like in a political way. So this is a very good point. And quit to be informal, solidarity, informal action, or advocacy, but start to be more informal, not institutionalized, but because I read something about the strong point of civil society, the civil society based organization have not a lot have not a lot of bureaucracy, so they are more free, they are more flexible. So maybe this informality led to this flexibility, but in the same way, there isn't a lot of representativeness in a political level. Just in the activism groups, but not very officially. So. Sorry, just it's not a question, just some.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you. Just let me give you an explanation over my slight distraction. Was not a distraction, actually. I'm very honored that I am, reality overcomes fiction most of our lives. I received here the visit of Oksana, a young woman coming from Ukraine, from Kyiv, and she's interested in community psychology. So that's how reality is. She just showed up. She's here. So that's life. And so these are all women, and one man there that are interested in this field. So so this is an interesting moment with Megan and this work to go ahead. So Roni, please take the floor, because I think you appeared in the big screen, so I assume you want to speak.
On the big screen, I showed up. No, I was just like, wow, this is very exciting that you just had, your name is Oksana, is that right?
Yeah.
You just showed up on Maria's doorstep while we were having this conversation about people's experiences of being on the move. I think that you planned this, Maria.
All right, that's it. That's how the world works.
I had a question brewing in my head for Megan. I'm not sure if you, it might be, tell me if I'm putting you on the spot, but I wonder what you think might be different about the findings from your studies if you were to conduct them post-COVID in the current situation. So do you think that you might have seen is there anything about the way that COVID affected the way that you went about your data collection or your interactions, or even about how the solidarity initiatives were working, that might have impacted on your project in some kind of way?
Thanks, Rani. Yeah, I think it would have impacted massively on the work. I think it's a huge factor in multiple ways. So prior to COVID, when I did conduct the qualitative research, it was done mainly in person. The photo voice workshops were done in person, so I was able to also build up relationships with the participants, meeting them outside the research project. I remember like going to the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland conference and kind of connecting with a lot of people through that, and just all of those in-person connections, that like building trust was a massive part of kind of being able to do the photo voice project. I don't think that would have been possible if I had to do that during COVID. Also I think solidarity, like in the ways that Dora explained so eloquently, solidarity has shifted and developed over time, and COVID has really impacted this. I think there's been positives and negatives. I don't really know if that's the right term, but there was like a explosion of solidarity online during COVID around kind of trying to advocate for people who are stuck in direct provision centres. There was even groups that are very overtly apolitical in community solidarity groups that actually have on their website that we are apolitical, we are not a campaign group, being very vocal about kind of advocating for people living in direct provision during that time. So it kind of really, it did mobilize a lot. There was also people in Cahersiveen. Do you remember I mentioned there's people who had been locked down inside a direct provision centre during COVID, and that place is called Cahersiveen. And I haven't got information definitely to verify this, but I feel people in a local area who would have been actually not very warm towards people on the move, shall we say, actually joined in solidarity with people in the direct provision centre because they had a shared cause, which was to close the centre in their local area. So maybe different motivations, but local people came out and stood up and kind of joined with the residents. So there are just some examples, but yeah, I think it would have been completely different. So yeah, that is a really massive factor that I need to consider in my thesis, which I need to write very soon. Yeah, thank you, Ronnie.
Yes.
Francesca had a question. She's been waiting very patiently. Francesca, there you have the floor finally. Please go ahead.
Thank
The
you.
host, finally.
Yeah, it's so nice. I see me twice, like two names. But yeah, no, thank you so much. It was really, I really enjoyed like both the presentation and also like the discussion of Dora. I think like very nicely like allowed us to have a really complex like view and analysis of different issues at stake. And I had like a couple of questions for Megan, and I mean, she can then decide what she wants. One was, I mean, actually, like questions, curiosities. One was about like temporalities, because obviously you didn't have the time to present like the last principle of succession. And as I'm currently very much reflecting on temporalities, the different temporalities of like experienced by people on the move, and also like how this like the border regimes and this like border control system actually like really affect and shape temporalities. So I was curious about your findings, if you want to briefly share them with us. And the other was like if you like, I was really fascinated by seeing like how you use like that framework that we put together for the analysis to try to understand the ecology of life in immigration detention centers, and you applied to your context of study. I was really, 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 really fascinated, and I really looking forward to read the article, because I want to really see in more detail how you kind of operationalize and what kind of aspects you were able to grasp through that. And I was wondering if you had any reflection like on how this theoretical framework worked for you, and if it was kind of, it worked well, and if you think it can, I mean, it's kind of effective in like grasping and allowing us to understand the ecologies of different migration related contexts, settings, responses. And then just like briefly on what like related to what Dora was sharing in a really brilliant discussion, I was thinking about two things that really, I mean, there are a lot of things there that we don't have time to unpack, but really we need to think more deeply around these issues. But like one thing that you mentioned was like the need to I mean, to look to kind of connect different areas of work and different also struggles from transformations and for social justice in different areas. And I know that there are people here who have been working in kind of different area, for example, like with to eradicate and end homelessness in the area of community mental health, to deinstitutionalize people from like psychiatric hospital and like meaningfully integrate them in our community. And so I was thinking about what can and then maybe this is not just to Dora but also to other people, what can we learn, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from these different these other areas of work that we can maybe use to think about like the issues and the challenges that you both kind of outlined. For example, I think like all the work done in like community mental health to deinstitutionalize, like the deinstitutionalization movement can really maybe taught us some lessons that we can kind of use. And then I was thinking about like this concept that now Donata Francescato is working on, which I think somehow can also help connect all these different areas of climate justice, migrant justice, like the area of community mental health and all these social justice like related processes and struggles we are doing. That is the concept of planetary sense of community. And yeah, I was just wondering if, yeah, because you touched on this at some point, Dora, about, and so yeah, I was thinking this could be like working on this idea of a planetary sense of community could be like a useful like tool to like connect work in different areas and also to work on these issues. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Francesca. So yeah, I'll just address those couple of questions for me, if that's okay. So the temporality aspect, well, maybe I'll address your first question, which will kind of explain I'll address your second question first, which will make more sense. So I have to be honest with this piece of work, that the way that I've presented it to you today. This ecological framework hasn't been a core part of my analysis of my work through the PhD so far, or of the piece of work with the Irish Refugee Council. But just when it was coming to bring the webinar together, I felt it would be an amazing way just to kind of gain a different perspective on the work that was done. And I've really appreciated that contribution that you've made to kind of analyzing the different aspects of the settings, and especially including the component of justice. And I felt that was a really important mode of comparison between the two types of initiatives. So it was really kind of trying on a theoretical framework to see. So thank you for bearing with me in that. And it was very kind of not as deep as I'd like it to be, but I think it definitely warrants further exploration. And I'm going to hopefully develop this further when I finally write up my thesis. So the aspect of temporality, the kind of succession component, isn't very well developed, but from my research, the concept of liminality of experiences of direct provision really came up through the photo voice part of the research people were talking about. And through their photographs, they showed images of waiting, of like indeterminate waiting, never knowing when their time would be up. You know, people in prison know how long their sentence is, but people in direct provision have no idea how long they're going to be there. So there was just this sense of time kind of expanding, but also being very contracted because their lives were on hold. They were all people who were more or less the same age as me, but whose lives just had to be put on hold, and they were just waiting to start their life again. So it was time and temporality is very disrupted and also kind of extended in some ways. And then through the solidarity initiatives, the aspect of time really influenced the bonds that we're developing. So whereas you know, initial interactions were very marked by those kind of identity negotiations and power asymmetries, which were still, of course, there throughout. People described kind of a shift towards becoming more connected, feeling like a family, kind of over time as well. So that's just a little note on that. But I really would love to delve into this theoretical framework further. Yeah, I'll leave the rest to Dora to address.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francesca and Megan, for this explanation on temporalities that actually connects a lot with some of the realities that are experienced in so many other contexts of ambiguity and of where people are offered a kind of support with conditions. I think this is common to many different realities, social realities, not just people on the move. And so connecting that with what Francesca was reflecting on, this idea of how can we learn from each other's experiences in solidarity? How can we bridge some of these experiences, some of them who have been successful historically in bringing more awareness and bringing more fair systems, such as the institutionalization of people that were previously institutionalized in mental health facilities. How can we learn from these developments and try to create a more planetary sense of community? And I think the answer lies always in changing the way that we allow people to participate. It always has to be decentering ourselves, I think. And this is a shift that is necessary in globally to sort of challenge this divide between global north and global south, to challenge this divide between people who are taking decisions towards the minoritized groups and the underprivileged groups, and actually make people the center of the decision-making processes, allow for their participation in a completely different way. So restoring new ways to become allies and to sort of conspire together in finding new systems of care, more wholesome systems of care, and creating this, what I described as unconventional bonds, which can be community-based structures where people help each other, like neighborhood support platforms that we had during the COVID pandemic, and which seemed so promising in the beginning. They were functioning so well. People seemed to be more open to, you know, give back and to find ways of collaborating together to support elderly people in the community, to support migrant people that could not access certain services, to support children that did not have structures where they could receive an education. Creativity emerged because there were unconventional human bonds created. So I think that we have to take this learning, we have to recall the gaining that we had from this COVID-19 pandemic, from these historical victories that we had in other areas, and really try to allow ourselves the space to come up with alternatives. I think this is what we are missing, is the I guess the space, and also of course the stubbornness, I would say, to come up with alternatives and keep struggling for these alternatives to have a space to be developed, right? So it's not an easy thing to do. It's maybe a bit utopic, but I think that the key is to keep struggling from unconventional places, from the solidarity movements, from the activist groups, from the platforms that combine people from different professions and different outlooks, such as, you know, the one organization that completed 8 years old this week, Alarm Phone, is a good example of this. They chose this pathway of, you know, becoming allies of people on the move, and they gathered experts, activists, small organizations, you know, people who were willing to collaborate in this collective vision of solidarity beyond borders. And from there, they allowed people to provide their testimonies of what was going on, and people to set up some injustices right, to confront the states on the things that were not going right, were not being performed correctly. So I think that taking these good examples, we should try from our own positions where we are, in the places where we are, in universities, in institutions, in solidarity groups. We should try to form more collective work, I guess.
Thank you to both. I don't know if there are other questions or comments or observations before. I mean, it's already late, but we have time maybe for a last one. Otherwise, we just wrap up. And Maria.
Not really a question, but maybe just a comment, and also to thank Megan and Dora for this brilliant webinar. It was really great to hear you. I was just wondering about this idea of a planetary sense of community, that it seems very good in practice. But I was just, and maybe Megan and Dora, you have some comment on this, how because not always sense of community is connected with social justice and empowerment of minorities and marginalized communities. So I wonder how we can actually integrate power and social justice dimensions in any approach to a planetary or a global sense of community, if this is possible, and how can we actually do it? Not sure if this makes sense.
Dora, do you want to take that?
If you want to answer, you go ahead. Okay, I guess it's a very tough question, and thank you for the food for thought on this. I think that the only way to challenge power is to really be willing to refuse some of the privileges that we in certain institutions or in certain spaces of privilege are. So what I was talking about before is some examples, the making sure that where we are and within our scope of power and privilege as well, because different people here have different access and different resources, right? But within the ones that we control, to try and open platforms or make sure that there is access, different access to resources for the people that have less power and privilege that we are engaging with. And this can take different forms. If it is university, then it's about paying the subjects of our research, for example, as partners, as collaborative partners. If we are talking about an institution of solidarity, then it's about creating more value for the work of people, not treating them as volunteers or as advisors or mediators, but actually treating them as partners and making sure that they have a place at the decision-making table. I think that these kinds of things, although simple, they can disturb a little bit the status quo, but we have to also be ready to, I guess, refuse some of the privileges that we have, which is not easy.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to both. I don't know, Maria João, would you like to end the meeting as like to conclude, I say, last words? I'm not sure she's.
I think she's not here anymore.
Can I quickly say something, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me. Megan, Dora, thank you for presentation. Megan, I came here today sort of a way to apologize for coming late to our presentation, you remember? So I missed part of your presentation because I met a young man that is from Uganda. He was the hotel boy in my hotel. So I stayed up all night talking to him because I was excited that everything we are talking about is what he has experienced. He's a migrant. He has swam the Mediterranean Sea. He's been in prison for so long, So I was super excited that I couldn't sleep. I was talking to him all night, and that's exactly what we're talking about here, that we need to give agency, at least that's what I hear Dora saying, that we need to give agency to the people to do this work themselves. I was a bit disappointed that the conference, ICCP, did not actually make immigration the center point of itself, because we're in Naples, and I do not know why they did not really highlight, we went to present, like we're researchers, but I would have preferred that the conference itself highlight immigration, because it's hot cake, especially in Europe, right? That's done anyway. There's nothing we can do about that right now. But I was kind of disappointed that that was not an hallmark of the conference itself. And I was also very sad all my stay in Naples, because as Erica and I had a discussion, you know, at night, I don't know if you can remember, but every Black that I see were in some kind of poverty, stinking situation. And I couldn't help myself. Even when people were serving me as a Black man, there's this disposition that I get. I felt very, very uncomfortable. I went to, I was supposed to go to UK. I mean, I was supposed to go to London, but I left because I wasn't okay. So I went to UK. It was a bit different in UK, of course, but I couldn't contain myself. Like, with all of this work that I'm doing, with my experience, with my privilege, I still don't amount as a Black person to what I think, and now I have privilege. But imagine these people that we're talking about, you know. So I felt bad and I left. Anyway, that's why I came here today to say thank you, congratulations for your presentation. And Dora, thank you for putting the name on it, temporality. It's something I've been looking at, experience of time. Because oftentimes we say these things as if when people are migrating their livestock. Meanwhile, everything continues. They're living, each movement, each stages, everything continues. Anyway, thank you guys for having me. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mashoud. And there's no need to apologize. And I'm sorry you had that experience in Naples. I definitely saw that kind of playing out a little bit around the conference site. You know, the inequalities that you can see. So yeah, I'm sorry that you had that experience, but it was a valid reason to stay up all night and talking to that young man. Definitely worth, you know, hearing his stories and spending time. So no need for apologies.
Okay, I guess we are at the end. Maria-Jo, would you like to end the meeting as you, I mean,
No,
you open
you
it,
can wrap
so
it up. Just you can wrap it up. Thank you to all of you. Yes,
okay.
please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for stepping in at the beginning. I had a flight delay, and yeah, that's why I was supposed to open it, and yeah, Maria-Jo kindly stepped in. So yeah, thank you again to Megan for like sharing her amazing work. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and looking forward, I mean, to read the work, because she has published some pieces. So strongly encourage everyone to have a look at what has already been published and to read the rest. And yeah, and I mean, I leave you with this challenge of like, if you have time and desire to do so, to expand and like use and expand this theoretical framework, because I was really fascinated by like how you use it. So, and thank also to Dora for the discussion and accepting to be with us today as well, and like, yeah, provoking us like to think about really important issues. And thank to everyone for making the time to be here. We're gonna soon share the information about our next webinar, which should be in December, but we will share it through our newsletter. So if you're not registered to the newsletters, please do so as soon as possible. And it's free, so you can sign up for the newsletter without necessarily having to become a member if you don't want to, although obviously we encourage memberships as well. And have a nice rest of the day.